Let me go on to our next one speaker, Arsenio Mataka, who is currently the environmental advisor to Attorney General Xavier Becerra, but for the last 5 years, or more than 5 years, he's been the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Justice and Tribal Affairs for the California Environmental Protection Agency. And it was during that time that he spearheaded many of the advances in institutionalizing environmental justice in California state government. Arsenio is a role model for young people in the audience, especially, who want to make a difference with their careers. He not only can tell us the backstory of how all this got to be done in California government, but he is truly a pioneer and a source of inspiration. Thank you.
Discriminatory podium.
Well, it's a real honor to be here today. I look out into the crowd, and what Amy mentioned is there's plenty of people that could come up here today and provide equally, or if not better, information, but we're going to try our best. Before I get into CalEnviroScreen, I wanted to give a little bit of a story. And I want to tell this story since we're here in San Diego. I have this vivid memory of being a child. I'm playing at home at our house in the living room carpet, while my mother and father would play a record of what the record player now looks like a dresser. It's a large record player. See, the older folks laughed because they knew what I was talking about. There was a particular song that always seemed to be on repeat. The song would start with a gentle guitar, and then it'd be joined by a marimba, which is like a xylophone, and some Congo drums. And it was like a samba, and it started like this. In the year of 1970, in the city of San Diego, under the Coronado Bridge, lied a little piece of land. A little piece of land that the Chicano community of Logan Heights wanted to make into a park. A park where all the chavalitos could come and play in, so they wouldn't have to play in the street and get run over by a car. A park where the viejitos could come in the tarde, the evening, and just sit down and watch the sun go down. A park where all the familias could come and just get together on a Sunday afternoon and celebrate the spirit of life itself. But the city of San Diego said, chale, we're going to make a highway patrol substation here. So on April 22nd, 1970, La Raza of Logan Heights and other Chicano communities got together, and they walked on the land, and they took it over with their picks and their shovels, and they began to build their own park. And today, almost now 50 years later, that little piece of land under the Coronado Bridge and here in San Diego is known to everyone as Chicano Park. Now, there's a famous song, I just read you a famous song, it's called Chicano Park by Los Alacranes. I couldn't come to San Diego and talk about what we're going to talk about without mentioning this song. I'm gonna go ahead for a second, then come back to CalEnviroScreen. This slide here, this is a famous TED Talk, a really famous person who talks about communicating from the inside out, about how you should communicate from your purpose, from your belief first, and then work your way out. And if you can do that, you can really effectuate change. That what you do is well-centered, and you have a good chance to make it happen. And this slide here, the gentleman's name is Simon Sinek. He's a big TED Talk person. He claims that people, organizations, and businesses and government institutions usually act from the outside in. They say what they do. We say how we're good at doing things before we say what we believe. We usually act and communicate from the outside in. But in 1970, for the inspired Chicano community here in San Diego, they sought action from the inside out. So starting with why, clearly their purpose in that song was to illustrate that the purpose of their belief was that the kids, the elderly, and families should be able to play, live, be happy in a safe and peaceful manner. How did they do that? They took direct action. In this case, they took over the park with their picks and shovels. And what did they get? Well, the result was they got Chicano Park. Now, many movements and struggles have started with the park. I'm from the San Joaquin Valley, of what the late civil rights leader Tom Hayden would call the spine of California. So if you can imagine the spine of California, that's where I'm from. And this is my home. And one of my first memories of activism for change was when my parents fought for a park similar to that in Chicano Park. In my community, my parents and other residents wanted a park because the neighborhood kids were playing football in a cemetery. I'm ashamed to say that I, too, played football in that historic cemetery, trampling over markers of people who had been dead for over 100 years. But my parents, who were young Chicano activists here in San Diego State in 1973, brought that learned experience of Chicano Park to my small town of 750 people. And like Chicano Park, they demanded and ultimately prevailed in getting a park. So my friends and I didn't have to play in the cemetery, right? But that wasn't the only thing going on in my community. As the image shows, we couldn't drink our water. The water system to this day still is, sometimes fails levels. It's getting better, but was frequently out of compliance with safe drinking level standards. As a child, it was common to be out on recess. There's a picture of my school in the middle, right underneath the O in home. And you can see there's a crop, you can't really see it, but there's a crop duster landing pad there. And we would frequently have crop dusters spraying near the surrounding fields while we were at school. Pesticides, of course. And sorry, I'll just go around. And so, not to mention, we had other environmental impacts like those tires that you see. Unfortunately, we have the privilege of being one of the largest tire piles in the world when I was growing up, and we burned those tires for electricity. And then to the south there is another incinerator where we would burn our trash, again, for electricity. And so going back to CalEnviroScreen, I said all that because when I would go with my parents to these local government meetings, whether it's a city council or board of supervisors, and they would share that story, those images, with leaders, decision makers at the dais, the people in charge of making these decisions for a broader community, they would always get cast aside and get sort of ridiculed or either just told that, oh, well, that's just anecdotal information, that doesn't have any science base to it. We all have it bad here. You don't have it any worse than any of us. And therefore, their sort of input was never acknowledged, and the vote was always unanimous and seemed to go always against the community. And so fast forward, I then get this privilege to come to the California Environmental Protection Agency. And to be quite honest, I wasn't very enthused because I saw that as an agency that has failed my communities and other communities. But I saw something there that they were up to, and it was through the work of a lot of the folks here in the room that already laid the groundwork. There was something going on with respect to cumulative impacts. And I saw that, and I saw my home. And I saw something that could be worked on that I felt really passionately about, that we could do something about. So this is my how as we look at CalEnviroScreen. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But here was an opportunity. It was an opportunity. Sorry, this thing gets out of sort. With CalEnviroScreen, and I say we because it's the academics like Manuel and Rachel Morello-Frosch, the community members, myself as a kid coming from this community, and now the agency that I was going to, we were driven by this belief that if we could somehow quantify the load, of the burden of pollution that people were catching hell from, that we could change the course and the future of these communities forever. That was the belief. I believe that. And so as we go along the process of developing this tool, a cumulative impact tool called CalEnviroScreen, that was our center point. That's how we were working from the inside. Now, how were we going to do that? These were my sort of principles that I thought, if we're going to do this, we have to have something that's science-based, because I saw what my parents went through when something wasn't science-based. It didn't work, right? Decision makers didn't respond to that. It had to be informed by community experience, as Diane said. Communities have been doing this for a much longer time than these agencies. They knew where these communities were at. We just really needed to put the data behind it. And there were also academic teams that had already been well ahead of us at this time of CalEPA of doing this work. The third bullet point was really important to me. I wanted the government to endorse it, and I wanted them to utilize it. And this is where we struggled a bit, because I believed that if they didn't endorse it, if my own agency did not endorse it, it was going to become another tool that sits somewhere that doesn't see the action that it deserves. And it was important to have it available statewide to everybody. No matter if you're from the top at Eureka or at the bottom of Imperial County. Everybody, like my community, should have the chance to know what type of pollution is in their community and how does their vulnerability, the people there, affect the way they deal with that pollution. And so we sought out by doing a thorough public participation, of which we benefited from the work that the communities had already done. And then we served I was hopeful at least that it would serve as a third-party validator. So if I had to go back in time, my folks would have, we didn't have any universities or any think tanks near where we went to, where I grew up, that they would have this opportunity to say, hey, this is not just us saying this is the state of California saying this. Maybe that could get the attention. And so these are some of the sort of struggles that we went through. The state government had to acknowledge that these communities exist. A big, big deal. Do you think states normally like to show maps that show where the highest pollution burdens are and where those happen to be, or where people of color live and poor people? No. We had to convince state government that it was the right thing to do. The community, as you just said, Manuel and them had created a tool that was far advanced and superior to CalEnviroScreen, and the community had already been working on it. And they had to sort of hand off that, transfer that knowledge to a government agency and work with us. That wasn't easy. And then we have local government, who I went through numerous meetings with the League of Cities, with all these local government people who were extremely fearful and would often tell me, what are they going to do with this information? How is it going to be used? It's only going to create problems for us. And then the scientists who would be asked to build a scientific tool, but at the same time have that tool rooted in a community experience. That's a challenge for the scientists. And industry, of course, and their prioritization, they were really fearful that this was going to be used to stop permits, to stop certain things, and get involved in enforcement. They were kind of okay with it being a prioritization tool, but they didn't want it making its way into the framework of permitting and enforcement. And then business. Now here's the kicker. Business feared that the tool would be used to redline communities from economic development. Now, if you know anything about redlining communities and sort of what communities went through when they were really redlined, and then to have somebody come back and tell you that they're so concerned about these communities that of their economic development that they're fearful of them getting redlined, we had to do some education on what redlining was. And that was fun. So I'm going to I'm gonna get cut off here, but this is what we ended up accomplishing. It's a tool. It's a simple mapping tool called CalEnviroScreen. It looks at pollution and it looks at vulnerability, and it puts them together, and it ranks every census tract in the state of California against each other, and it shows us which communities are high and which communities are low. And now we use those maps to take money and put it in these communities. As you saw that affordable housing unit, that comes from these maps pointing to those communities. $2 billion from our cap and trade funds go to these communities. Enforcement initiatives have been started that focus on these communities, and now I, at the Department of Justice, use these maps and this information to weave them into our legal arguments. I'm gonna leave that there.